I'm Joel Davis, the grandson of Ira Call Sr. Ira Call was born on March the 23rd, 1861 in Bountiful, Utah. He came to the Chesterfield area in 1879, accompanied by his uncle, Chester Call, and they drove a band of horses and mules into this area to be used and sold for use in the pioneering of the Chesterfield area. This is Emma Jane Barlow, the first wife of Ira Call Sr. They were married in the year 1880, and to this union was born 12 children. This is my grandmother, Fanny Loveland, who married Grandpa Ira Call in the year 1890, and to this union was born 6 children, making a total of 18 children, 8 sons, and 10 daughters by a plural marriage. Grandpa came into this area as a pioneer with his families, and he was a self-educated man like most of our pioneers, but he took up to carpentry above some of the other trades that he learned. One of his interesting things that he done was built caskets for his friends and relatives as they passed away, and for these he seldom ever charged any fee. He built 3 homes, brick homes in the Bancroft area, all of which are still being used by families in that area. He built 1 home, a log home here in the Chesterfield area, which is still standing, and which will be restored by his grandsons and granddaughters this summer, come July 21st through the week of the 26th. And Grandpa had lots of fine horses. He built a livery stable in Bancroft. He had 2 stores in Bancroft, plus a machine store, making 3 in all. He had a cabaret in the Bancroft town site, which was used for recreational purposes. He owned stores in the Chesterfield area, the first one coming in 1888, the first store in Bancroft coming in 1892. And he owned other stores in the Chesterfield area as the town progressed, and was a successful landowner, businessman, and neighbor. He died in 1928 in Salt Lake while cranking a Packard car. He owned one of the first cars that came to the Fort Nick Valley.
Several of the early settlers were polygamous, which accounted for some large families. It also accounted for some interesting brushes with the law.
This is my great-uncle, Joseph Holbrook Call, who was one of those polygamists in the valley. He had so many brushes with the law and was brought to trial about every 6 months for 2 or 3 years until he got tired of this, and so he moved to the Afton, Wyoming area. The governor of Wyoming liked to see these polygamists because they were such good colonizers, and he enjoyed having them in that area of Wyoming, as that was being colonized at the time. Joseph said that as long as they didn't cross over the border into Wyoming or into Idaho, that they were treated royally in the Star Valley area.
We only know of one man who was living at the time that the Chesterfield Ward was first organized. That man is Eugene Ruger, who will be 102 years old next month. Today we're going to visit with my Uncle Gene about some of his experiences that he had in his early life in Chesterfield. Uncle Gene?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the tithing office and the experience you had there.
Well, I was working for Chris Call, and the tithing office was just down below the store a little ways. And a fellow named Ern Thompson, he was quite a friend of Chris, you know, and he kind of religious too, you know, so he wanted me to pay tithing. I said, how much do you have to pay? He says, well, he says, pay whatever you want, it's all right with me. So I went down to the tithing office, and he was with me, and I threw a $10 bill down, or a $5 bill. I don't remember, it's one end of the bill anyway. Threw it on the table, and they said, want to know how much I got a month? And I told them $30. And they started scratching their heads about it, so I reached over and picked it up, and I said, Ern told me I could pay what I wanted on this. I said, if you don't want it, I'll take it. So I took it and put it in my pocket, went home and spent it to home.
What did you buy with it?
I bought me a bottle of whiskey.
That's
great. We used to put on shows. There was a fellow named Osborne Call was quite a showman, and he put on shows. And so we had a play we put on Widow McGinty. They've got some of the pictures there of it. And so they had on that show, in the program, on the show, you know, Essence of Soda, Kodan. So Murray says, Essence of Sand. He says, what do they do with Essence of Sand? Well, I said, we didn't know what else to do with it, so I said, we bought a bottle of whiskey for the matinee and a bottle of whiskey for the night.
That's very good.
We had a good time.
I'm sure you did. I understand that you worked as a storekeeper in Chesterfield. Tell us a little bit about that.
I used to herd sheep all the time. And the last year, I herded sheep as I had a buck herd. And then I'm up at Chesterfield by horse camp, north of Chesterfield, horse camp. And I stayed over to the cow camp with Bill Lashley and some of them fellas, you know, and them bucks wouldn't leave. They stayed right there. And so.
What about?
And then I went to work, and I run the store bill for myself, you know, because I was boarding myself, and I kept hanging around the store until finally Chris gave me a job at $30 a month, and I kept Annie and Arthur and my other sister, Nettie.
Nettie and Annie and Arthur, and these were your brothers and sisters?
Yeah.
Right.
I kept them. And I worked for Chris a long time, 10, 12 years.
And then he went on a mission.
And then he went on mission. And so I told you about the Ira Call before.
Tell us about Ira Call then when he came out.
Well, I come up to the store, and he says, I heard you was going to run the store. And I said, Dave Butterfield wanted me to, but I said, I told him I didn't have any money. Well, he says, now it's just as good a time to start as any. So I was broke. Went home, told my wife. She says, don't worry. He said, we'll get along. And we did.
Good. How many years did you run the store then?
50 years in Bancroft and 2 years in Chesterfield. And I took all the sheep, got nearly all the sheep business and the cattle business. When I was in Chesterfield, they all come to support me. And I had a good business. I went to, they wanted me to come to Bancroft to that, and equity, you know, had equity there. So I could see the big building, you know, and I thought a pretty good chance because we had a lot of customers and the equity.
Uncle Gene, tell us a little bit about your father and his coming here from Switzerland.
My father, I was his second wife's boy, and the missionaries come and converted him, and he joined the church. And when he joined the church, the people in Switzerland where he was working, because he was a Mormon, they didn't want no more Mormons. Didn't want any Mormons in their outfit, so they canned him. And then we emigrated to Utah. We landed in New York, and then when we come from New York they sent us down to Utah. And I remember we went to...
What was your father's job in Switzerland?
He's a school teacher, professor.
And when he came here to Chesterfield, what did he do?
He was janitor he couldn't talk the English language. Oh, he lived in Utah for quite a while.
Uncle Gene, we want you to tell us about the Ruger dugout.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, I didn't know where my folks was for over 4 years. And I got a letter from my father, and I was in Manti, Utah, living under a feller by the name of Ross Tuttle. Herded sheep for him. And he wanted me to come to Chesterfield, so I come to Chesterfield in 1900. I think it's in March 1900.
And where were they living?
They were living in in the dugout. That was their home. That's all the home they had, was the dugout.
Adrian and Catherine Willie Ruger are my maternal grandparents. The picture includes Uncle Gene as a child. I am Mary Aline Hogan Treasure. This is the site of the dugout in which Grandpa and Grandma Ruger and their family lived. Originally, I'll have to turn. Originally, when they lived here, it was just, as said, a dugout in the side of the hill, rounding at the top. On top of the dirt was a log cabin in which they slept. In later years, the dugout was remodeled, and this is as it appeared years later. Their children were Grover Arthur, Anna Elizabeth known as Annie, Henrietta known as Nettie, and Eugene, Grandpa's son by a former marriage, but who Grandma always treated as her own, and Uncle Gene always called her Ma. Grandpa Ruger was a school teacher and professor of music in Switzerland. He was a master of the violin, organ, and music composition. Grandma was a seamstress in a clothing factory. They accepted the gospel in Switzerland. The tide of feelings of opinion turned against Grandpa, and he was unable to obtain employment. They came to Zion, settling in Utah, where their 3 children were born. While living in the dugout, Grandpa was the janitor for the meeting house and the old schoolhouse which burned. He was a bookkeeper in the ISA store. He wrote beautifully and was ward clerk. Grandma Ruger made a home of the dugout, filled with love and hospitality. It was Grand Central Station for the friends of the children. Being dugout dwellers bespeaks of poverty, but the Ruger family was rich with eternal possessions: humility, love, unity, concern for all, and a very special sweetness. In 1902, Grandpa passed away. After Daddy's untimely death in 1923, Grandma Ruger lived with us. My mother passed away in 1934, and from then until Grandma's death, she became a second mother. I thank Heavenly Father for the privilege of being a granddaughter to Adrian and Catherine Willie Ruger. In 1980, a team of archaeologists from Brigham Young University excavated the Ruger dugout and recorded many interesting facts.
The tithing office where Uncle Gene tried to pay his tithing still stands. It is owned by the Chesterfield Foundation. Money is being raised at this time, and the plans have been made for its restoration. To the south and to the west of the tithing office, just under the brow of this hill, ran the 24-mile ditch. Below the ditch was built a baptismal font where many baptisms were performed.
This is the remains of the first known store in the Chesterfield area. This is where Uncle Gene Ruger ended his career as a store owner in the Chesterfield area in 1916 and then moved on to Bancroft. This store came about in 1888 when, I recall, sold about $500 worth of cattle and horses and brought merchandise out of Soda Springs to stock this store. It was later sold to Mose Muir and Charles Higginson, and Ira at that time went ahead and built another store. This is number 3 store in our community. It's what we call the modern store, made out of brick, that was killed here in the Chesterfield town site. The brick is 3 brick deep on the walls. This store was operated and used by both Indians and immigrants as they traveled through the country, as it was the central spot between Soda Springs and Fort Hall, and the Indians done lots of trading here. It was said that this store contained everything or anything that a person wanted. The trouble was trying to find it, as it has a full basement and it has quite a floor space on the top with things piled on shelves high above one's head. Driscoll owned this store and operated it until 1945, when he sold it to his brother-in-law, I.H. Smith and Sons, from Fair Oaks, California. They stayed and operated the store till 1947. At that time, it was sold to Joseph Holbrook, wife and son, and they operated it for 2 or 3 years and then closed the doors. And this was the end of the stores in the Chesterfield town site.
The history of the Portneuf Valley would be incomplete without mention of the Tolman families.
The picture we're showing now is of the Judson Tolman Sr. family. This man, though he didn't live in Chesterfield, had several of his progenitors as early founders in this area. My name is Gerald Tolman. I'm the grandson to Cyrus Tolman, one of the early founders in the valley. He came into this valley in 1893 from Bountiful. Prior to his coming, 3 of his brothers had moved in here under the direction of Brigham Young from Tooele County, Utah. They were Lamoni Tolman, Judson A. Tolman, and Joseph H. Tolman. I have some information about some of these men. Can you turn to the pictures here? This is a picture of Judson A. Tolman, who was the second bishop in Chesterfield. His wife, Marianne Howard. I should have reviewed that. He was one of the early founders. As I said, he came in 1882 to this valley, doing a lot of the early settling work. My grandfather, getting back to this picture here, Cyrus Tolman, and his wife Eliza Ann Riley were the parents of 10 children. Grandfather was the mailman in the valley from 1900 through about 1935. He's well known for his promptness. Everybody in the valley knew him from the Chesterfield area out through the area south of Bancroft, even to the Ivans area east of Bancroft.
You have heard during many of our interviews mentions of Mose Muir. Mose Muir was a nephew of Chester Call by marriage and was involved in the first store, or had interest in the first store, in Chesterfield. This is the home where Mose Muir and his wife lived. It was later occupied and known as the Butterfield home, and now resided in by Lyle and Ruth MacArthur. Truman Barlow